So in this video, I want to be going over who I think would win in a fight between Yami and the Espada from Bleach. So, Yami I think is one of my favorite characters to talk about when it comes to versus battles specifically. Primarily because I think he has a lot of interesting abilities, and especially when you're using verse equalization, which I will be using here. A lot of the Black Clover characters, namely Yami and Asta, tend to be very high tier characters because of the way their magic works and how it would interact. Like, especially in the case of Asta, because of his I guess anti magic. But in terms of Yami, he has insane hacks in terms of his durability negation and such. But we'll go over that in a little bit. Something I want to clarify is if I say Yami, I'm going to be referring to the Yami from Black Clover. Because there is also a Yami in the Espada, and when I'm referring to him, I'll say Bleach Yami or something like that, just to avoid confusion. So starting off with scaling for Yami, first off we have his main strength feat is going to be him blocking a punch from half powered Lucifero. And now, so Lucifero at this point in the series was definitively the strongest, being, and he had magic power that was greater than any of the devils that the gang had fought before. And he also just had more magic than anybody else on the planet, is the statement. I would assume aside from the Julius. So here we have, scaling that we can scale him to, because this is a feat from William, which is significantly, he should have significantly less magic than half Lucifero does. And so for Williams, Magic Tree Descent, the general calc tends to put it at a large mountain level. He was able to affect the sky on a pretty grand scale with it. And it's worth noting, I don't love Versus Wiki in terms of its scaling and where it puts characters, but it is still nice to use in terms of seeing feats. I use it for feats and less so to rely on their scaling, because I think it's very inconsistent. But the scaling, usually the math checks out and it seems about reasonable. Moving on to feats though, in the saga after half Lucifero, so it's hard to say that Lucifero would exactly scale to this, but because Asta did have a training arc, but it wasn't necessarily something that should have made him more powerful. He was more so just perfecting his ki. But same difference. He was able to split essentially the whole sky and send all of the clouds in a large distance, or all visible clouds completely away, which I think is usually scaled to be a country level to continent feat. So it just gives us an idea for the general scaling of Black Clover, and then just for more strength and destructive ability feats, when the devils at the towards the end of the Lucifero arc, all detonated. They covered a large area all across the country, which also scales to about country level. Worth talking about, I think, the size scaling for the Clover Kingdom. There is no real definitive statements we get for something like this. People have thrown out calculations using statements regarding travel speeds. I think there's a statement that Asta would take a few days to run from the Black Clover headquarters to Hage, and so using that, and then they use normal speed scaling for him. I think the general consensus is that it's a medium to big country level in terms of size, and then obviously we have characters who are capable of destroying and threatening the whole Clover Kingdom, including Leet, who is the main antagonist before Lucifero, and definitely should scale way below him. So we could put Lucifero pretty comfortably at large country plus, and by extension we can get Yami to the same level because he was able to block that attack physically. So I think anything from large island to small to even large country level is very reasonable for Black Clover. I think sometimes people push it to multi-continent, and I don't think that's the most unreasonable line of scaling, but I think for the most part we could probably keep it at country, big country, to be more reasonable with it. I think it's about reasonable. So in terms of speed, Yami's speed, I mean, we have a lot of statements in Black Clover about attacks being light speed, and early on in the series, light speed is considered fast. But at the same time, the characters massively upscale to where they were before, especially if speed scales off of the amount of magic you have and are able to use. Then the speeds at the end of the series would be like ludicrously faster than light. But at the same time, it is like pretty much, I think, consistent to say light speed is pretty impressive for early Black Clover, right? Yami was able to fight against the Dark Triad, who at least like one of them is said to be light speed, and they seem like they all scale relatively close to each other. So he's able to fight 1v3 against a bunch of like light using characters that were light speed. He's able to fight against Leet, who's also using like light based attacks. So I think it's reasonable to say that Yami should be faster than Light, especially because later on in the series they upscale from where they are now. Characters are speed blitzing characters that are like currently fast. So through speed blitz you usually get from faster than Light to like faster than Light plus, right? Because Yami would be getting speed blitzed by maybe the word devil. I forget what his name is. And then like that devil would be speed blitzed by Asta, who's then slower than like half Lucifero, and so on. That's more or less the reasoning you'd say that Black Clover is probably reasonably faster than Light. Now, for the main thing that Yami has that's his claim to fame is going to be his hacks. So first off, I think it's important to establish when I say verse equalization, I mean a few things. Like one, Yami will be able to see the Espada. I think anything else is probably not quite fair, right? And so I'll also scale and say like magic will be about equivalent to spiritual energy. So anything that has specific interaction with either magic or spiritual energy will be able to work in the other verse as well against their respective power system. That being said, here's going to be Yami's main feats. He has his Dimension Slash, which is an attack that cuts through the dimensions and thus should ignore conventional durability. And we haven't seen anything that's able to stop it or anything that even like should reasonably. I think what I mean is he's able to cut through even like Dorothy Umbridge's like dream dimension, which is like a kind of a fictitious realm in a sense. So it does just ignore conventional, not logic, but durability in that way. And if you want to say that no, it shouldn't, and that's like a fallacy, then like one, you're going against the statements given in Black Clover, and two, Yami's AP would scale way higher because of the things he was able to cut with his Dark Dimension Slash. Typically, we don't scale hacks abilities for AP because it doesn't make sense to. But if you do want to be like uncharitable to Yami and say, oh, it's not gonna like flawlessly cut through everything. We've only seen it cut through XYZ. It was able to cut through an infinite dimension in Dorothy's like dream realm. So then we would be getting Yami to infinite AP anyway. So either way, he's pretty much killing anything that he hits with his Dark Dimension Slash. And then another important thing to note is his black hole technique. So the black hole is going to be the most interesting thing when it comes to verse equalization fights. Essentially, it's just an attack that absorbs magic and stops its effects. So when Yami was fighting against Dante, he was able to put a black hole above, and he called it Black Moon. And essentially, it has like this area of effect where anything inside of it can't be any magic attacks that, in a sense, like work as projectiles or like would leave the body are absorbed into it. And an example that keeps it away from primarily just being, I guess, like physical attacks is he was able to stop Dante's gravity effect, which, it wasn't something that traveled from his body. It was just like there was an area around him where he was able to increase the gravity greatly. And Yami was able to nullify that. So, even like some conceptual abilities that don't necessarily like travel like a projectile normally would can still be nullified by Black Moon. So now we're going to move on to the Espada. And so for the general scaling for the Espada in terms of power, we know that the top 4 Espada, and by extension Bleach Yami as well, have Ceros that are capable of destroying Las Noches. And so in terms of scaling, it's hard to get an idea as to exactly how big Las Noches is. I think the general idea that has been obtained through pixel scaling and again like walking from one end to another feats is that it's around country level, and I think that's reasonable. So in terms of like AP, I would say that we can probably about equate Black Clover to Bleach in general, at least to the high tier characters in Bleach. The low tier characters in Bleach don't quite get to Los Noches level, and thus don't quite get to country level. It might be more like city level and or maybe like a small country level, but that's like the general line that's generally pretty accepted. There is a lot of like variability, but generally for the Espada, like that part of Bleach, country level is like a very consistent meta. And to clarify, we're using the Espada in the like Espada arc. We're not using them anything past that, like any of the Thousand Year Blood War stuff. So in terms of speed, the general gist is we have like pretty consistent light speeds, although it is worth noting that I think early on, at least like in the Espada arc, it did seem like light speed was pretty impressive to most of the characters. Like we have Aranero dodging light based attacks, but he does look like he struggles a little bit with it, right? And so, I think generally light speed's going to be about the level of the lower Espada, and then as you scale up, they should be able to like, some of them are probably like way faster. I wouldn't imagine it's too difficult to assume that Okora can probably speed blitz Espadas 5 through 10, right? Because he does just scale. Like there's like a massive jump in power from Neutra to Okora, especially when Okora is using his Resurrection. So in terms of general abilities, I forget what it's called, but I'll just call it Flash Step. Like the Espada have something similar to the Soul Reapers, where they are able to just jump really quickly from place to place. Again, I think it probably is about like light speed level. It just shows that they have like they're like a little comparatively faster than they are in terms of straight travel speed. And so they also have an attack called Acero, which is a super condensed ball of spiritual energy, which when fired, detonates, and it has like usually like a pretty big area of effect, and it can be pretty damaging as well. It's their highest AP attack. And they also have the ability to harden their skin, so slashing from like a normal blade needs to like it can like I guess make it so that you need to cut harder in order to actually cut them, right? They can like block very normal sword strikes from characters. So getting started, we're gonna have Yami, who is weirdly the weakest and the strongest Espada, right? He's number 10, but when he transforms, he becomes number 0. So we could assume in terms of like raw destructive ability, he is at top, right? His Cero should probably be able to easily destroy Los Noches, and he is probably like narratively like a good deal stronger physically than the other Espada. That being said, we never really see him move around after he has his transform, and even before his transformation, he's like pretty slow, and he doesn't look like he would be moving too fast in that form. So I'm gonna assume that for the most part, he's like a pretty stationary target, which isn't really going to be a problem for someone like Yami, because if you're just standing there and taking the Dark Dimension Slash, then you're just gonna die. Now this is where the names start to get a little hard to pronounce, so I'm gonna do my best. But Arano, I never really understood the design for this one. He kind of looks like he has like a weird pencil eraser head, with like some sort of like thimble on top. But the thing that's important to note about Aranero is that he has like 10,000 different abilities, but we only ever see him use like one. So it's really impossible to get a gauge for how strong he is. We can really only use what we've seen him do. And the main thing we saw him do was he was able to use like a trident that can control water. Pretty cool, I guess. But in terms of scaling, he doesn't really quite get to the other Espada. And then in terms of abilities and hacks, we don't really have much for him. Something that is worth noting, though, is that he's able to communicate telepathically, which could be, an important thing for the Espada in terms of communication. And now this is the hardest name. I'm going to call it Saya Lepero Grands. He's like the scientist of the group. Definitely the smartest Espada. I don't think there's really much debate there. And he also has quite like a myriad of abilities, but his main 2 combat abilities are going to be, he's able to like discharge like a liquid from his body, which is gross. But anything that's contacted by it, even a drop, turns into a clone, which he can have fight for him. So if Yami ignores him and manages to get hit by one of those drops, it can probably be like a pretty big problem for him. And then his other ability is that he's able, after like taking lethal damage, he transferred himself into somebody else's body and essentially impregnates them. It's really gross. Enters through the belly button, but also it's not like an instantaneous thing. You would be able to react to it. So now we have Zamari, and now Zamari has one of the more, I guess, interesting abilities of the Espada. Maybe like the most hacks ability, and like the most, I guess, essentially one shot potential. Essentially anything he looks at falls under his control. So if he looks at like a specific body part, he can control that body part as if it was his own. And if he looks at somebody's head, he gets control of their full body. Okay. And so something that's weird about this is that when he uses this ability against Byakuya is able to react to his eye, like his pupil dilating and essentially like showing that he's looking at Byakuya, and Byakuya is able to like flash step out of the way. And now, in terms of like how this could work, by the time Byakuya sees the eye expand, he would have technically already been seen, right? Because light only travels at a fixed speed. So it's really hard to say exactly what this means. Maybe it means, to some extent, Zamari's like sight attack travels slower than light speed, or maybe Byakuya's just, it doesn't really make sense. But it's also worth noting Byakuya was very aware that this ability was going to happen as well, so it makes sense that he would be like generally trying to avoid being looked at as well. So yeah, Zamari is physically one of the weaker Espada, but in terms of his ability, he is like up there, like maybe actually the strongest ability that the Espada have at their disposal. Grimmjow and Neutra don't really have too much to talk about aside from their scaling. And this is also like another spike in power. Grimmjow is significantly stronger than Zamari, and by extension, Neutra probably should be as well. Grimmjow, especially his Resurrection form, is able to go toe-to-toe with Masked Ichigo, who should be like able to speed blitz most of the characters that are lower on this list. Neutra's main claim to fame is his like durability. He has like really hardened skin, but that doesn't really matter that much against Yami because he ignores conventional durability. So then next up, we're going to be talking about, I guess, oh man, I'm blanking on his name. Okora, yes. So Okora is debatably the strongest Espada. It's really hard to say. The thing is, like, he's never shown his Resurrection form to Aizen or any of the other Espada, so they wouldn't know how strong he can be. So, in terms of his strength, he's the first Espada who we know is very like capable of destroying Los Noches with his Resurrection and his Ceros, and everybody above him should be as well. And then, like, in terms of speed, again, we have, like, the Hollow Mask Ichigo for the main, like, frame of reference. Really pushed Ichigo to his limit and made him, evolve past. So, in terms of strength, like, he should scale higher than the other Espada. Then we have Tyr Haribel. Her main hacks is going to... And again, like, from now on, all these characters, like, scale pretty much Okora base form and above. Tyr Haribel has the ability to control water at like a pretty massive level. She can control atmospheric water as well, and she's able to use it to essentially like have like higher AP attacks as well. She can like create slashing attacks with the water. Baragon is probably the strongest Espada in terms of like fight capabilities because his hacks are kind of nuts. His main thing is he has like an area of effect around him where anything around him decays and ages. And it's important to note that his decay is very specifically an aging thing, right? So if anything comes close to it, it like rapidly ages and disintegrates. So we saw that with Soifan's hand. She had to chop it off because it got hit and the effect traveled up her arm. And also with non-physical or non-human, like non-living things as well. When Soifan launches her nuclear warhead, I guess, at Baragon, it doesn't like damage him, because the explosion ages around him before it can actually reach him. So, worth noting, anybody who's in his range is pretty much dead. And any attack that's thrown at him that's like a physical object is going to decay before it can like significantly damage him. And then last we have Coyote Stark. His main claim is he just has like super fast and super strong Ceros, the strongest Ceros in the Espada by far. And he can like shoot them out like pretty much instantaneously from his gun, and he has 2 of them. So, for him, it's just going to be like Cero spam. That's kind of his whole thing. Now, in terms of who I think would win, I think it's pretty hard to get like a full gauge for this and to have a definitive answer because there are a lot of variables, right? For one, we're going to assume because of verse equalization, the Black Moon can stop most conventional abilities that the Espada can throw. Like, for example, the Ceros should be like pretty definitively unable to touch him. Coyote Stark is going to be pretty much like useless because of that, aside from like his, obviously high strength and speed scaling. And like Haribel, Aranero, the pink-haired one, I'm not trying to say his name again. Their like abilities generally probably shouldn't hit him. Even like the pink-haired one's like liquid droplets, I guess would be like in some sense infused with a spiritual energy, so they should also get like at least their ability nullified before it touches him. And now, so the main thing that's going to be is, whether or not Zamari's eyesight attack should be able to work inside the Black Moon domain. And I would say no. Like, I think all abilities in Bleach come from spiritual pressure. So that effect should be something that requires spiritual pressure to work as well. And that even includes if he's outside of the Black Moon domain. It still wouldn't work because Yami is inside, and that's what matters, right? That being said, again, like in terms of hacks and durability, Yami is able to fight against the Espada. I would say he's probably a good deal faster than most of them, with the exception of maybe Okora. And in terms of like his durability negation, he's definitely able to just like kill any of them if he lands his Dimension Slash, and probably able to hurt most of them with like a normal attack as well. That being said, there's really 2 problems that come up, and that's going to be Berrigan and Zamari. And it's not even fair to Yami exactly, because the reason their problems isn't necessarily because of their strengths or their abilities, but it's more so because Yami doesn't know their abilities. If Yami went into this fight knowing Zamari and Berrigan's abilities, it should be no problem. He would probably be able to speed blitz Zamari right away, and he would know to keep a distance from Berrigan. But, not knowing that, there is like a very real possibility that if the fight starts and Yami doesn't immediately open his dark hole, he just loses, right? If Zamari looks at his head, he loses. If Berrigan, if he steps into Berrigan's range, he also loses. Like, there's just nothing he can really do. And if he jumps into Berrigan, if he lets himself get seen, he loses the fight instantly. Which is why the Espada are very interesting, because they are like a very hacks. A lot of the characters are very hacks based. To the extent that when you're analyzing a fight, especially like a 1v10, it can become really difficult for a character that doesn't have knowledge. In terms of the other characters, I think for the most part he's piecing, like definitely Yami, Grimjow, Neutra, the characters who really like require their stats to win. He's stat checking and killing with his durability negation. And then in terms of the others, again, most of them are invalidated because of the dark hole ability. And I think it's like worthy of acknowledgement that if Yami was fighting a fight against 10 people he didn't know and like had no idea what their abilities were, it's probably reasonable that he would just start off with his black hole technique. He definitely should. So like, that's why I would eliminate Berrigan as like a potential threat. But at the same time, Zamari, his attack is so like strange and so like innocuous that if like Yami spends even just a second talking to them without activating his black hole technique, it doesn't do it like immediately as soon as the second starts, Zamari can just look at him and kind of ruin him, right? And so if Zamari looks at anything other than his head and like tries fooling around, then Yami should be able to activate his black hole, and then immediately, like Zamari's attack is useless. But otherwise, Zamari is going to be a huge problem. And then in terms of Okora, since he's the highest scaling character, it's worth, I think, just addressing how exactly they interact with each other. Again, like in terms of AP, Yami is generally like matching most of the Espada, all of the Espada, I would say. His like attacks, I think, are like a higher end of country level. We can get him to like continent level based on the scaling. And honestly, the series hasn't ended yet. And given how Black Clover has evolved, I imagine that it's going to go to some ludicrous level again. But even without Dark Dimension Slash, he should be able to damage Okora. But there's also this important aspect to acknowledge that like the Espada aren't necessarily. I mean, they're not fighting alone, right? They're fighting all at once, and that can be a problem for Yami as well. Although it is worth acknowledging that we don't really have any sort of feats for the Espada working as a group. They do seem like they're pretty like egotistical, like each in their own respect. So they probably wouldn't get along well, but it was still fighting 10 against 1 is going to be a huge advantage. That being said, though, them not having like super coordination is going to be a big hindrance to them and something that Yami could take advantage of. We have seen Yami fight 3v1 against characters before and come out on top. So in terms of like everything, I would say that I would like to give the edge to Yami, but the main problem is going to be Zamari's like looking hacks. So I think if Yami has knowledge of their abilities beforehand, it's an easy clap. Even if they have knowledge of his abilities, there's not much they can really do. But that being said, I don't think it's really fair to say like Yami should get knowledge before going into the fight, and Zamari wins. But at the same time, like it doesn't also feel fair because then Zamari is like one of the top tiers in like versus battles in general because he just looks at anybody and he can pretty much instantly win the fight. So I guess I would leave it up to interpretation. Depends on exactly how you would imagine a fight going. If you're saying Yami can start with Black Hole or like Zamari he knows Zamari's ability going into the fight, then I think Yami can pretty comfortably like come out with a win just because of his insane speed and durability negation. Otherwise, I think the Espada win primarily through Zamari. Their other hacks aren't quite as impressive and are pretty easily nullified by the Black Moon. So that's my general thoughts, and I am quite a Yami glazer as well. I'm willing to admit. I do kind of feel like maybe I value like his skill set more than most people do in versus battles, but I think that's because he is just generally an underrated character, especially when verse equalization is on. So anyways, let me know what you guys think, because I think that there's a lot of doubt. It's like a very dubious battle, and I'm kind of curious what other people think about it as well. All right, thank you for watching.